Welcome to episode number 14. I'm CJ Werleman. Thank you for joining us. This week we examine how Arab governments have betrayed hundreds of millions of Muslims across the world to enrich their respective rulers. But first, a quick reminder to hit the subscribe button below, as we don't want you to miss out on any future episodes. Now let's get into it. Look, European colonialism has had a devastating effect on the Middle East. It not only destroyed all levels of indigenous political, social and civil life, but also put in place a top-down system of autocratic rule, with France and the United Kingdom installing hand-picked dictators to pillage and plunder the region's resources and wealth at their behest. In other words, European colonialism has been awesome for these guys. It has made the Saudi Crown Prince, the Emirati Crown Prince, and all the other Arab Gulf monarchs insanely wealthy. So rich that the Saudi government, for instance, pays its 4,000 princes a living allowance of upwards of $250,000 per month. By means of comparison, the average Saudi earns only $750 per month, but that's in return for a 40-hour work week, while the royals throw lavish parties, fly first class across the world, and buy the latest Lamborghini. The Saudi royal family is worth an estimated $100 billion, the Kuwaiti royal family a whopping $360 billion, the Emirati royals come in at $20 billion, while the Bahraini, Omani and Qatari royal families each tip the scales at roughly $2 billion each. But like all of the world's super rich, they too have an insatiable appetite for even greater wealth, because with great wealth comes greater power. And as every repressive king, dictator or autocrat knows, you can only rule over a restive population, one that fears and hates your rule, by exerting even greater power against them, which is why much of their wealth is invested in the security apparatus of the state, including the use of secret police, informants, high-tech surveillance systems, torture dungeons, and unmarked graves in the middle of the desert. The Arab uprisings of 2011 was the sum total of every Arab despot's fears, and explains why the Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad began shooting and bombing those who protested against his rule that same year. And also explains why all of his regimes have invested heavily in weapons and technology that allow them to exert greater control over their citizens. But today their rule has never looked so secure, and they can continue to go about what it is they do best. And what it is they do best is this: not allowing anyone or anything to get in the way of their quest to maximize wealth and power. Heck, Arab concerns for the Palestinian people, the status of Jerusalem and the preservation of Islam's third holiest site did nothing to stop these governments from fostering closer financial and military ties with the apartheid Israeli regime. I mean, let's be clear. In return for normalizing Israel's war crimes and throwing the Palestinians to the proverbial wolves, these Arab governments received access to Israeli and American money and weapons that were previously excluded from, including the world's most sophisticated piece of military hardware, the F-35 fighter jet program. But the Arab betrayal of a besieged Muslim majority population does not start and stop with the Palestinians. Sadly, it goes much further. Last year, for instance, when a coalition of 22 mostly Western democratic countries, including the United States, co-signed a letter calling on China to end its human rights violations against 13 million Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, these Arab Gulf regimes leapt to the support of the Chinese government. Hell, the Saudi-based Organization of Islamic Cooperation even praised China for its, quote, providing care to its Muslim citizens. Wait, what? It takes a Joseph Goebbels level of propaganda to equate genocide with the giving of care. Leaked Chinese government documents, along with thousands of survivor testimonies, prove China is carrying out mass incarceration, forced sterilization, forced abortions, forced family separations, along with torture and executions to curtail the Uyghur population. So I now know what you're thinking. Why are these Arab regimes lending their support to China's effort to repress and annihilate this Muslim minority? Well, the answer has two parts. The first part being the financial incentives China offers these oil and gas-rich countries, but the second part speaks more to the point. That being Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, and the others enthusiastically support China's crackdown in Xinjiang because his government shared the Chinese government's hostility towards Muslims, anything smacking of political Islam. Basically, these regimes fear any kind of Muslim, both secular and religious, who publicly expresses criticism or condemnation of the regime. And therefore they envy the way in which China imprisons and murders its critics, including Uyghur Muslims, human rights activists, and journalists. And we shouldn't forget these same governments are also sucking up to Beijing by helping them round up Uyghur migrants within their own borders and then deport them back to Xinjiang, where they face certain imprisonment and death, which surely must constitute the most unimaginable form of evil like ever. It's no different than deporting Jews to Nazi Germany during the middle of the Holocaust. But that's not all. Saudi Arabia is also guilty of deporting Rohingya Muslims to Bangladesh and Myanmar, where a genocide remains ongoing. In 2019, when I spoke to Rohingya refugees who had been held in Saudi Arabia's notorious Shumaisi detention center for more than 5 years, they said to me during a month-long hunger strike, and I quote, "We would rather die now than be kept in here forever or sent to Myanmar or Bangladesh," end quote. Saudi authorities eventually put an end to their protests by deploying an array of inhumane tactics against them, including torture and beatings. This leaked video from 2019 provides a mere glimpse of that abuse. So while we're still on the topic of genocide, it's important to bear in mind that these same Arab regimes are also helping India ethnically cleanse Muslims in occupied Kashmir to gain access to Indian markets and weapons. Both Saudi Arabia and UAE expressed support for India's stripping away of Kashmir's semi-autonomous status in 2019, a move that has paved the way for the launch of a Hindu settler colonial project in the Muslim-majority territory, one mirrored on the Israeli occupation of the West Bank. In fact, the UAE praised actions taken by the Indian military in Kashmir by absurdly claiming Indian security forces, and I quote, "improve social justice and security and encourage further stability and peace," end quote. I mean, what? This is a military that has killed 100,000 Kashmiri Muslims since 1989, but the UAE government counts itself a big fan. It's a fan because these Arab regimes pull in $100 billion worth of angle trade with India, with Indian investments in the UAE surpassing $55 billion, while Saudi Arabia counts itself as India's second largest supplier of oil. Look, I could do an entire episode alone on how the UAE government has become a rogue state and a global menace. No country plots more coups, funds more mercenaries, arms more violent militias and terrorist groups, and attacks more journalists and human rights activists in the Middle East than the United Arab Emirates. And that's just the start of it. The UAE is colonizing Yemen by stealing its land, seaports and oil fields. It's inciting an insurgency in Somalia and arming the terrorist militias led by General Haftar in Libya, which are right at this very moment murdering Libyans who rose up against Gaddafi and ISIS. The UAE was also behind the plot to overthrow the democratically elected government in Egypt in 2013, and the UAE is behind the current coup in Tunisia. Now, it must also be acknowledged here that the UAE and Saudi Arabia count among the world's most prolific cultivators of Islamophobia, having funded Muslim-hating, far-right and pro-Israel groups and political movements throughout the UK, Europe and the US. They also push and encourage US war on terror narratives by supporting the idea that Islam is a gateway to terrorism, and then use this as the basis for justifying the repressive abuse of their own citizens. They also use these Islamophobic narratives to lend cover to Israel's human rights violations in Palestine, India's atrocities in Kashmir, and the use of Uyghur concentration camps in China. In 2017, The Intercept published leaked emails from the Emirati ambassador to the United States describing the ideology of political Islam as a, quote, problem that needs to be dealt with, while praising the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, as someone willing to address it. It's for these reasons Arab Gulf leaders lavish praise on former US President Donald Trump, a man who hated Muslims with every ounce of his being, as well as former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the current Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and other right-wing political leaders who have been elected on the back of stigmatizing Islam. So you can see how utterly preposterous that Saudi Arabia, for instance, claims to be the guardian of Islam and protector of Muslims, at the same time it's a willing participant to the persecution of Muslims around the world, as are its Arab Gulf partners. Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel and help spread the word with your family and friends on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. And please consider supporting this endeavor by becoming a member of this show at patreon.com/CJWellerman. But for now, good night, good morning or good day, wherever you are, and stay blessed.